Over the past 4 decades, Nintendo has produced some of the best video game consoles ever, coming up with some of the most classic franchises that are generally suited for people of all ages to enjoy. However, not everything's so easy, as once in a while, a game will get released on one of their systems which turns out to be so difficult that even the most seasoned gamers have trouble beating it. My name is Copycat, and welcome to the hardest game for every Nintendo console. For the purpose of this video, these games don't have to be made exclusively by Nintendo, but just have to be released on one of their consoles. Before I get this video started, if you haven't yet, then please subscribe to my channel, and hit that bell button to stay notified when I upload new videos. Of course, we're going to start this video off with the NES, or the Famicom as it's known in Japan, which has 3 specific games that deserve to be talked about. The first is a classic called Ghosts and Goblins made by Capcom, where you play as a knight named Arthur who must battle through hordes of the undead in order to rescue the captured princess. Even though you wear a suit of armor, you're still incredibly vulnerable, as if you take one hit from any enemy at all, then it will get completely destroyed. After that, your character is left to fend in just his boxer shorts, where even taking one hit of damage will instantly kill you. You only have a total of 3 lives over the 6 levels, where the only way to collect extra ones is by reaching certain point totals. Once you initially beat this game, then you'll have to replay a slightly harder version of each level to unlock the game's true ending. This is really just a pain. Another very hard NES game that many people would have tons of trouble with was the Silver Surfer, developed by Software Creations back in 1990. This game is a combination of 2D shoot-em-ups with fast-paced platforming elements where you control the surfer trying to collect the cosmic device for his master Galactus. What makes things so difficult here is the massive amounts of enemies that come flying towards you trying to deal that one damage point that will cause you to have to completely restart the level. However, it's not only enemies that you have to look out for, as if you touch any wall, ceiling, or ground, then you'll instantly die, which in a fast-paced game like this is just unfair. Finally, the game that's considered by many as the hardest on the NES is Battletoads, made by Rare Studios in 1991. The creators of this game intentionally made it difficult, incorporating all of the hardest aspects of 2D platforming, arcade fighters, and top-down shooters. There's even a bit of a meme that people haven't made it past the 3rd level of this game, which is definitely saying something to Battletoads' difficulty, as there's a total of 14 you need to complete to beat it, by the way. I mean, just look how tough this one section of the specific level is, it just looks impossible. Even though most Game Boy titles are considered rather simplistic in today's standards of gaming, there is one series that many consider almost impossible to fully complete. This is the Final Fantasy Legends series, developed by Square Co. and released in North America in 1990. Now, even though Square did make this game, and it shares the identical name, it actually has no relation at all to their iconic Final Fantasy series, and was rebranded as the Japanese name, Hell Tower Warrior Saga, was deemed unsuitable for North America. Now, the thing that makes Final Fantasy 1 and 2 so difficult is that leveling up is an extreme pain, mainly because there's no experience point mechanic, making it impossible to know when you're going to hit certain markers. On top of all that, there's no way to manually increase your stats, and the fighting in this game sports a very unforgiving weapon system where they all have very low durabilities, which can be extremely frustrating, especially because beating enemies is hard enough already. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System, which was released in North America in 1991, had a wide array of incredibly hard games, so I had to showcase more than just one. The first is actually a sequel to Ghosts and Goblins, called Super Ghouls and Ghosts. It follows a very similar formula to the original in that you have to rescue a kidnapped princess, fight a horde of ghoulish enemies, and replaying the game and beating it a second time will unlock the true ending. Not much has changed in the second iteration, as it's just still unforgiving. Another game that deserves to be mentioned in this video is one you may not have heard about, called Hagane, The Final Conflict, made by CA Productions. Released in very limited quantities in North America, Hagane was meant to emulate both the Shinobi and Ninja Gaiden franchises, but put its own spin on things with a very futuristic setting. What makes this particular game so hard is the very complex platforming sections with enemies mixed in that are no easy tasks to defeat. If you manage to somehow find a copy of this game and are skilled enough to beat it, you'll be hard-pressed to find someone else who's done the same. Finally, the game that most people actually consider as the hardest on this system is Super Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back, made by Sculptured Software and LucasArts. Released in 1993 as the second game in the trilogy, this title features run-and-gun platforming mechanics and allows you to switch between Luke, Han, and Chewbacca. I don't think many people usually complain when a game has too much content, but this is exactly what makes this particular one so hard. There are massive amounts of tough enemies that want to kill you in every single level, which makes you feel as if you don't even have time to think. LucasArts even admitted they made the game too long and too hard for the average player, and toned things way down for the Return of the Jedi. The Nintendo 64 is the next console we're going to look at, which has many difficult titles, making it really hard to choose which ones to include in the video. Of course, games like Perfect Dark and GoldenEye could easily make the cut, as both have extremely hard modes that exponentially increase the difficulty. Now, this technically could be changed at any time to make the gameplay easier, so for the purpose of this video, I want to look at ones that are hard through and through. One of the biggest standouts for me would have to be F-Zero X, mainly due to the game's incredible racing speed and large amount of racers you now have to face. This title sports some very impressive driving controls for the N64, which feels much smoother than the SNES version. However, the added vehicles and crazy collision mechanics makes actually winning a race near impossible. Not only do you need skill to complete this game, but you also need a bit of luck. However, the game that many people consider as the most difficult to beat is actually one I had never heard about, called Jet Force Gemini, developed by Rare. This is a third-person shooter, platformer, puzzler, and adventure game rolled into one, with a very strange premise of having to stop a group of alien insectoids from destroying Earth with a giant asteroid. To properly beat this game, you have to constantly go back to previous worlds you've already completed, changing to one of 3 characters, using their special abilities to rescue every little furry creature, and collect every ship part to unlock the game's true ending. This absolutely tedious task took a somewhat revolutionary shooting game and made it just a pain to play. The Game Boy Advance, released in March of 2001, was a huge step forward in handheld video game technology, allowing for a much more fleshed out experience. This led to some absolutely massive RPGs like Advance Wars, Fire Emblem, and the Golden Sun series, which were incredibly long and quickly ramped up in difficulty towards their conclusions. However, in terms of overall difficulty, many people agree that CT Special Forces is actually the toughest. This game plays very similar to the Metal Slug or Contra franchises, as it's a platform shooter but with a very zoomed in camera, making it a struggle to see the hordes of enemies rushing towards you. In all honesty, most GBA games aren't that hard, just some are tedious as heck. It's hard to believe that it's been almost 20 years since the release of the GameCube, which came out to rave reviews and through its 8-year reign was home to over 600 titles. This system also spawned one of the most frustrating platforming games of all time, Super Monkey Ball. The sequel specifically was jam-packed with insanely tough levels to roll through, with an added difficulty of only having 60 seconds. If you want to 100% the entire game, then you'll have an extremely hard time trying to collect every banana, which are placed in almost impossible to reach spots. Another tough GameCube game that a lot of people put on their list as the hardest is Mega Man Network Transmission. This title has some stupidly hard platforming sections mixed in with the most unforgiving boss battles that you'll ever come across in the franchise. However, almost every single internet thread puts Ikaruga, made by the developer Treasure, as the hardest on the GameCube. The game style plays like a traditional arcade asteroid shooter, but is absolutely cruel in its difficulty. It also has a weird mechanic where you can switch between black and white, letting you absorb the bullets of the shade that you choose. Honestly, even looking at this gameplay gives me a huge headache, and the fact that the screen is much smaller than usual doesn't help with this at all. At the time of its release in 2004, the Nintendo DS was very interesting, as the secondary touchscreen added a very different type of mechanic into each title's gameplay. A good example of a tough game that implemented this is Trauma Center: Under the Knife, made by Atlas, where you have to complete medical operations and cure your patients of the guilt virus. Getting the highest rank during each operation was almost impossible, as when I originally played the game, I remember struggling mightily to even normally complete it. However, it isn't this Atlas-made game that most people call the hardest on the DS, as that title has to go to Etrian Odyssey. This is a 3D dungeon crawling point-and-click RPG where it's almost inevitable that you'll die several times during each level with literally no checkpoints to help you out. Atlus is also responsible for the Shin Megami Tensei series, which is known to be intentionally brutal to beat, so it's no surprise this one is as well. The Nintendo Wii introduced the very innovative but somewhat janky motion controls that made games like Red Seal or Trauma Center Second Opinion feel much more difficult than they should have been. However, you can't blame faulty system mechanics for making a game more difficult, but you can if its confusing gameplay is the cause. That's why one of the hardest games on this console is Zakken Wiki, developed by Capcom Studios. This point-and-click motion-controlled adventure game looks very simple at first glance, but once you really start to get into it, you discover that it's actually needlessly complicated. This game doesn't hold your hand at all, giving you tasks that are in no way straightforward to complete. Different tools and animals you collect have to be used in vastly different ways and in different combinations than what seems apparent. This is a very long game, so completing it fully with maximum scores will take a lot of patience and definitely some smarts. Now, probably the hardest RPG on this system is Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn, which is a pain in the butt to play even on the easier modes. This is due to the intricate complexities the game offers, as making one wrong move can easily result in a loss of characters or a straight up defeat. I couldn't even imagine playing a game like this one on its highest difficulty, as it always seems like the computer is intentionally given an unfair advantage. However, throughout the many lists I've seen online, people always say that Donkey Kong Country Returns was one of the hardest games by far on the Wii. Now, I don't completely agree, as I only really remember being frustrated during the Rocket Barrel levels, specifically the giant Bat Boss battle during World 4-5. This is because traversing through each level on the back of a rocket is very unforgiving, as you have to constantly maintain your balance while dodging the attacks from the bat. I died a lot of times during this level, as a single hit from the boss will result in a loss of life. The 3DS was one of Nintendo's most interesting endeavors, bringing in a state-of-the-art screen which had stereoscopic 3D effects. This didn't add much in terms of gameplay and actually would give you a slight headache after a while, but was still a really cool feature that had never been seen before. Of course, this system is home to tough RPGs like Shin Megami Tensei and Fire Emblem, which are arguably the most difficult on the hardest settings. However, if I had to pick one game that would give you an immense challenge right from the start, then I'd have to go with VVVVVV by Nicholas Studios. This 2D platforming game is very unique, as it replaces your usual ability to jump with letting you now control the direction of gravity when standing on a surface. This leads to some unbelievably unforgiving moments right from the get-go, with levels that are full of spikes, moving platforms, and strenuous puzzles where you're guaranteed to die several hundreds of times. Once you get used to one mechanic, the game throws something else entirely in your direction, leading to a stupidly frustrating experience. If there was ever a slight blemish on Nintendo's almost flawless record, then that would have to be the Wii U, which featured a name that was too similar to its predecessor, and the strange gamepad which was never quite used to its full potential. It is unfortunate that the system didn't sell too well, as there really were a few great titles that many people missed out on, and Nintendo has even gone as far as to re-release them on the Switch. In terms of hard games, Donkey Kong Country, Tropical Freeze, gave me a lot of trouble during my first playthrough because of the extremely precise jumps and tough enemies you'll encounter. However, a game that makes pretty much everyone's list as the hardest Wii U title is Zombie U. The zombie enemies are tough to kill, and the gameplay mechanics are so frustrating that they make even the most simple things during your playthrough that much harder. There's also an almost impossible survival mode where the players have to stay alive and only have one single life before it's game over. When looking at the hardest game currently on the Nintendo Switch, I'm going to have to exclude the huge library of Nindie games, as they aren't exclusives to the system and are really just ports from Steam or were originally released on mobile devices. That means then the hardest game on the Nintendo Switch is one that actually launched with the system, The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Now, I do understand that there have been instances of people beating this game in under 30 minutes, but if you play completely through the story and try to face every divine beast on your way to Ganon, then you'll definitely have some trouble during your playthrough. However, the hardest part of this game is its Master Mode, which throws much tougher enemies at you who actually regenerate health if they aren't defeated immediately. On top of all this, your weapon's durabilities are a lot lower, meaning to pass through certain enemy heavy parts of the game, it would be a lot wiser to play more stealthy than to run in guns blazing. Alright, so that's going to be it for today's video, guys. I really hope you did enjoy this one. If you did, please leave a like, comment below, and of course subscribe to my channel. Also, if you guys haven't yet, please follow my Instagram at CopyCatGamer, where I upload some cool clips and items from my collection that you won't see anywhere else. Hope you guys all have a good day, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.